Hi, and welcome to the Reclamation Project podcast. We are so glad that you're here, that you're listening, and hopefully that you're a part of the conversation. We desire that this discussion would not just be words that are recorded, but hopefully words that offer insight, that they help you in tough parts of life. We hope that these words are things that are applicable, actionable, and hopefully in some way healing. We hope that, just as Gary said in a previous podcast, that our ramblings and our babblings would help you find solace in the fact that you're not alone, that hope, that you can hope in others going through the same things that you've gone through, and that it would help bring peace. Today we are going to continue our discussion on happiness, but we're focusing on looking through just a lens of pain. Everyone has encountered pain in their lives. I think that's not a long shot to say. But we encounter it differently. For some, it's moments of discomfort that have come out of nowhere. For others, it's seasons of long, drawn-out anguish. And still for some, it's a lifetime of chronic, unrelenting, exhausting torture. Whatever level of pain you endure, there are ways to navigate through these rough waters and find happiness and peace.
And like everything else, Jeremy, I think the way to best clarify what you're talking about is to bring some definition to it. And I want everyone to know that pain is not the absence of happiness. In fact, even within the broader realm of happiness, we can experience pain. What do we do with it? How do we navigate through it? It's kind of the culture we're in, and even the church culture. It's so polar opposite where the old days, it was as if you're a Christian, you weren't really allowed to express happiness. Something about suffering was holy. Then today, in the culture that we have today, we're always supposed to be happy, always supposed to be wealthy, rich, and all that. And so these polar opposites cause us some confusion. I love the verse in 1 Peter where he says, "Friends, don't be surprised if this ordeal has come to test you," and actually that word test really just means to prove you, but as if something strange was happening. So if we're experiencing some kind of pain, he says, why do you guys act like it's a strange thing? In the church, kind of taught that your spirituality is tested by no pain, no problems. And if there is a pain or there is a problem, there must be something wrong with your spirituality. And that's really not what he's saying. So as we're defining pain, know that it's not a strange thing. So if it's something that we're going to experience, even Jesus said, you will suffer tribulation in this world. We should expect it. So if that's the case, I think what we're going to talk about today is when we identify it, how do we navigate through it?
Yeah, and for us, we've kind of identified 4 types of pain that we feel like we see in ourselves and in other people. So we're just going to walk through those, kind of give some perspective on what that looks like, and then come out the other end and talk about how we can, actively engage in navigating through that pain. So the first type of pain that we identify and that we want to look at is just emotional pain. And what emotional pain is things like loss and grief and divorce and even, to a certain extent, failure. I've actually had a lot of discussions with people lately, and it's amazing that a lot of them are going through different types of emotional pain. For one, I've seen a few and had conversations with a few that they've lost children kind of abruptly, early, and with very little warning. For them, they struggle to cope with understanding and feeling just that completeness that they've lost. For others, they've been in nasty relationships that leave them feeling not valued, worthless, hopeless. One of them has a spouse that just constantly, belligerently, crassly defeats them emotionally, mentally, physically, and they feel like there's no way out. Another person I talked to had gotten divorced and lost that sense of family, lost the sense of the life that they knew, and a lot of friendships had been broken and had left them because of that. and they felt so alone, so empty, so broken up inside. And then there's failure. We want so much to accomplish something, and then we fall short of that goal. Sometimes it's in our personal lives, sometimes it's a professional goal. But through it all, there's hurting, there's aching, there's longing for peace and healing. And in the end, we want to see an end to the incessant, unrelenting pain.
And it's interesting, too, Jeremy, along that continuum, the effects of emotional pain vary depending on where you are on a maturation basis. So when you're young and you experience some emotional pain, some of those that you just listed, and we could add rejection and all different kinds of abuses, they call the term is called arrested development. Not like the TV show.
Love that show. Love that show.
Well, they stole it. They stole it from a psychological term. Arrested development just really means this. So as something happened to you when you were young, you've grown, you're chronologically older, you're physiologically older, but you stagnate at that place maturity-wise. I recall a couple at one time doing some marital counseling, and in the process of going through an argument, he said, this is why we can't talk. Every time we get into an argument, she acts like a 12-year-old girl. So I stopped the conversation, and I looked at her and I said, what happened to you when you were 12? And she started to cry, and she recounted some abuse in her life, stagnated, arrested at that point. So when you're working with someone who's suffering this pain, we have to define what that pain is before we can even begin to reframe it and help them navigate through it.
And really that emotional pain can sometimes manifest and move itself into mental pain. And a lot of times when we hear mental pain, we think of mental illness. We think of all the shootings that we've been seeing, all the problems that we've been seeing on the news with mental illness. And really mental pain is so much more than mental illness.
And when we talk about the mental part, they call that the state of which you're in. One of my certifications is in NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. And one of those things that we talk about is the state. The state is where you are in your thinking and your believing and your experiencing. And in that mental piece, we can change the state you're in. It changes all the other things that happen. I remember in my internship there, and they would always call for people to come up and work through stuff on the stage, and I would always volunteer because I'm an experiential learner. So he had me come up on the stage in front of about 20 people, and he said, listen, I want you to think about one of the worst times that you've ever experienced. So I did. I was remembering being at my daughter's funeral, sitting where I was sitting. He said, close your eyes, feel what you were feeling, see what you saw, hear what you heard, and when you're kind of down, wave your hand at me. 2-3 minutes into that, I waved my hand, and he said, all right, stop. He said, were you thinking that? Were you watching yourself do that, or were you reliving it? And I said, well, I was reliving it. He said, all right, I want you to do this. Close your eyes, get out of the chair you're sitting in, and go outside and look through the window and watch yourself watch the funeral service. Hear what you would hear from a distance, see what you would see from a distance, feel what you might feel from a distance. And he gave me about the same amount of time, 3-4 minutes, and he told me to stop. He said, what was the difference? I said, the pain wasn't nearly as great because I was looking from a different state. And conversely, if I'm trying to remember good things, I want to relive it. If I'm trying to navigate through a hard time mentally, I want to change the mental state I'm in. Therefore, it changes the corresponding feelings that go with it. So I think it's incumbent on us to realize that not all of mental pain is mental illness. Sometimes it's simply just the state of mind that we either A, choose not to change, or really can't. Sometimes there are chemical deficiencies, hormonal reasons. You can attack pain in the same way without having to diagnose if it's simply just a state of mind. In fact, it's interesting to know that even in a chemical deficiency, you can still change your state of mind to help you navigate through the pain.
So we've talked about mental pain and we've talked about emotional pain. I think logically, holistically, the next step is to talk about physical pain. Physical pain is just a huge one for a lot of people. They've gone through ailments, they've gone through physical hurt, things that have just caused pain that has radiated into the rest of their lives. For me, I know this all too well. My wife, when she was in her early teenage years, she had a severe bout with scoliosis. And the doctors gave her diagnosis of having a surgery that would help her not to have grow basically into a hunchback over the years as she got older, and wouldn't cause deformities. So they went in and they did this surgery, and they basically bracketed two metal rods inside of her back, one on each side of her spine, fused it together, and attached it with screws, and almost instantaneously she was in pain. I mean, she had to lay in bed for weeks and weeks after that surgery. And then once she was done with that, she was having pain all over the place from the fact that these rods were causing her to not be able to do certain things. And when her body did do certain things, it would cause pain. And eventually those rods started rubbing on her and rubbing on the underneath part of her muscle fiber in her back, and they would cause issues. They eventually found that this metal that they put in people's backs, a lot of people were becoming allergic to, and it was causing issues there as well, inflammation and allergies, and the screws would come loose and just sit inside of someone's back and cause them pain, as well as that screw would rub against the muscle as you moved, just turning left to right. There would be severe pain there because screws were loose. And so the only real option that she had was to get that taken out and to go through that pain again of 4 weeks. And so that pain kind of permeates itself into the emotional, the mental, to where you think, oh, I can't do this. I can't deal with this anymore. The emotional anguish that comes with that, the mental anguish that comes with that, it just becomes bigger than the physical itself.
I think we think about depression being really only a mental pain, but I can't imagine living in that kind of continual chronic pain and it not affecting your mental state. And that's how integrated all these areas are when it comes to pain. But I think here's where we come to a little fork in the road, because all those things have happened maybe to you or to someone. But dealing with what I do when I'm counseling people, I've come to the conclusion that 80%, it may be high, but I exaggerate, so let's stick with that. 70 to 80% of people who I deal with, their pain is self-induced. Now, that's different than having a degenerative order, a trauma that you've experienced that you've had no control over. But the kind of pain that we produce ourselves, that's self-induced, equally as painful, equally as damaging, yet we would have a sense of more control over. I was thinking about a young fellow who says fellow anymore? It was a young man who I was counseling in 21, 22, and as we're sitting there, he would experience just tremendous pain in his stomach, and it would reach around to his back. But his pain came from the fact that even at that early age, he was an alcoholic like I've never seen at that age. So his pain was self-induced, yet equally as debilitating. The good news is, whatever your pain, however it presents itself to you, either happening to you or you produce it yourself, there is a pathway that hopefully we're going to show you today how we can navigate through that. And that leads us into one of the fourth ones we've identified, which is a spiritual pain. And again, these are also connected. A lot of times if you're experiencing emotional, mental, physical pain, the best place to aim your anger is God. So it really does have a spiritual effect on you. It's hard when you're in physical pain to say, I'm gonna read Scripture today, and you read the promises of God and you're not experiencing them, and it feels in your mind like this can't be true. Let me give you a personal application to that. My wife and I were married at a really young age, and our first daughter was born. By the time she was 2, she'd passed away, and it was painful. It was hard to work through. And we'd had 2 other daughters, and finally our third daughter came. I was going to Bible college at one point, and my daughter was sick. My third daughter was sick. And I remember going to the dean and say, listen, I need to be home with my wife. We'd found out just recently that she'd had the same disease that had taken our first daughter, and I need to back out of college for this semester. He sat me down and said, I don't think God likes quitters, which I chipped in right away. I'm not quitting. I'm just sitting back for a semester. 2 months after I dropped out, which was in February, she passed away in April. And I remember the elders or the leaders of the school coming to me, and one of them said, don't you think maybe God took your daughter because you dropped out of Bible college? Now, lucky for him, I was way too respectful of authority. I probably would not have the same reaction today. But after hearing that, instead of coming and trying to comfort me, what I felt was shame and guilt, and almost as if I was the cause of my daughter's death. So that took a huge spiritual toll on a guy who was going to Bible college to say he was going to dedicate his life to service of the Lord. So yeah, the spiritual pain permeated through all the different aspects of my life as well.
And, that spiritual manipulation that you felt, I think it's felt by a lot of people who are around churches or around spiritual, I put that in quotations, people.
Yeah.
I mean, you see the manipulation on, say, Channel 21, or the religious station around here, where people are manipulated into feeling and thinking certain things. And I say even if you were to go to a church locally, you could feel that spiritual manipulation. I mean, to think of the way that sometimes when the gospel is presented, it feels like a beatdown of what you've done. Mm-hmm. And it's not just a pastor kind of shining light on what you've done, but after they've shown the light on what you've done, it almost sometimes can feel like a beatdown of that. Yep. And really, the beauty of the gospel is that despite what you've done or what you might do, that you are loved, you are valued, you are needed, desired, and you have purpose in God. And that's not how it feels a lot of times when you're presented with the gospel. It's instead, you are the lowest of the low. You've been the scum of the earth, now become this. Well, you already are this. You already are valued. You already are loved. You already are desired. And so that manipulation can manipulate you into decisions to do things that maybe, God doesn't want you to be.
I can tell you as a pastor, the worst thing I could do was stand on a stage and tell someone how bad they should feel about how bad they already feel. There's nothing productive about that. But at this point, like if we were to stop here, that would be kind of a downer. So how do we navigate through the pain? How do we, when we're going to experience pain, that's what Jesus said. There's trials and temptations coming. And Peter said, don't even be surprised. Why are we surprised when it happens? Are we just so conditioned that we're supposed to have everything work our way and feel good and be rich? He said, listen, don't be surprised. So how do we do? What state do we put our mind in when we understand or experience pain? It goes back to kind of what we talked about in the last podcast is reframing. Reframing is just this. If I change the meaning of something, I change or have likelihood of changing the corresponding feeling that goes with it. So in Peter, which you have to realize, Peter's talking to Christians who are being persecuted. Nero was blaming them for lighting Rome on fire. They were getting persecuted all the time. And he says to them that, listen, cast all your cares, your anxiety on God, for he cares for you. And it sounds almost flippant, like just give it to God. But he said at this moment, this God of all grace who called you into his glory, after you have suffered a while, he'll restore you and he'll make everything wrong. That's pretty powerful. If I can think about that in the moment, then I reflect back to another verse in Philippians where where Paul says this, and it really doesn't make sense, but if we could grasp this in pain, I think it would help us reframe what we're going through. Paul said, you know what I want really? He said, I want to know him, Jesus, and the power of his resurrection, and I want to share in his sufferings. That's weird. Who gets up and says, I want to share in his sufferings? He so wanted to know Jesus that he's saying, I'm going to take this suffering, I'm going to use it to know him better. Jeremy and I both referenced Francis Chan a few times. Obviously, his ministry's impacted both of us. I was watching, he was talking about interviewing these North Korean missionaries who, if you remember, a few years ago were captured in the Middle East by the Taliban. They were being held hostage back to South Korea, and they started to kill them one at a time. And what they realized, these people, they'd taken a Bible and they'd ripped up little pieces and passed it to the group. That's what they were holding on to. And as he tells the story, the pastor told the head of the Taliban, listen, if you're going to start killing him, you kill me first. I'm the pastor. I want to die first. And the other man rose up and said, well, I'm a pastor too, and I'm older, so I want to die first. To which the first pastor said, but I'm ordained and you're not, so I will die first. Kind of a humorous setting in all of that. They killed 2 or 3 or 4 before they were released. The interesting thing was the missionaries a year later met together and said, the one thing they said that was common, don't you miss being there? Yes, it was horrible, it was painful, but in that suffering, I'd never been closer to God. There was this feeling that I had there that in all this pain and anguish, I experienced, a peace and a comfort. So if we're not in pain and we're comfortable, we don't get to experience the Comforter, which is the Holy Spirit. So the idea is pain serves for a lot of purposes. I don't think we really experience happiness unless we've had pain. If you just had your life go along on a very even basis, I don't think that we would even appreciate the happiness that we're talking about. So we're saying, if you're in pain and you've experienced any one of these 4, take a step back, cast all your cares on him, and understand that this pain is driving you to a place where the Comforter can actually come in and bring a sense of peace and help you navigate through it.
And that's a great place to end up. But I think for a lot of people, they might not experience that comfort, that peace, at least when they feel like they need it or when they want it. So what happens when that peace and that comfort doesn't come in those times?
No, that's a great question, Jeremy. And I think, and probably one of the connecting points we've always had through life, we have a little bit of rage against the machine in us. And I dislike the little church colloquialisms, just give it to God and it'll be okay. Because the truth is, and I can say that experientially, standing on the balcony at Phoenix Children's Hospital, gave it all to God, trusted that there was going to be, really felt that night that we'd had some good news with my daughter. I was going to experience a miracle. Went home for the first night, slept, showered, came back to the next morning. After this sense of peace, I gave it to him and he's in control. The doctor said my daughter was brain dead and we were going to have to pull the plug. I didn't get that positive experience. And I want to make that clear, so I appreciate that question, is that when you give it to him and when you stand back and reframe it, it does not necessarily mean it's going to remove the pain. What it does is, that's why I think the Holy Spirit's called the Comforter. In the process of experiencing the pain, I can have a peace. Going through it, I might learn something that only that pain could have taught me. To not have pain would be to not learn some lessons. So I think part of that spiritual abuse we talked about is, you just give it to God and it should be okay. And if it's not okay, there's something I'm doing wrong. It's more than just casting all your cares and turning around hoping for the positive ending. It's to know that I may experience this, I will experience this, but in it and through it, his will for me is good. It was interesting. I was watching last night. They said the most underlined verse in the Bible app, the most underlined verse is Jeremiah 29, where God says, listen, I know my plans for you. They're good, not bad. They're for prosperity. He knows this path I'm going on. And I think part of what Paul said in Philippians is I get to know him better through that. if I cast it on him with my expectations that I will not have pain, I think that's where we get off track. So no, that's a great question, Jeremy.
And we're all going to go through pain.
Yes.
We're all going to have issues, and some of us relief is going to come quickly. For some of us, peace is something that's not even on the horizon. But I think what we find is that when we know that there is a purpose for the pain, when we know that there is a God who loves us and who knows that we're going through that pain and wants to lead us through it, and when we know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, we can somewhat take solace in that and make that our goal, to walk through and navigate through these waters of pain, to hopefully reach the end together.
And in that sense, pain actually drives you towards that happiness we're speaking about.
It does. So if you are in that pain today, if you're in one of those places, the spiritual, the emotional, the physical, or even the mental, know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Know that there is peace that can be achieved and hopefully will come for you. Know that you can have comfort even in the midst of your pain. And we hope that you would find those things. At the same time, we know that there's people that are struggling. So if you do have one of these aspects of pain and it just seems like it's never ending, we hope that you would find someone to talk to. If you need references, if you need an ear, you can definitely contact us and get a hold of us, direct message us on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, or email us, and we'll try to put you in touch with those people that can help you, or if we can be of assistance ourselves, we will do that. And you can find all of our contact information at rppodcast.com. It's at the bottom left, for social networking and such. Regardless of what pain you're in, we hope that you do find the help, either through us or through someone else, and that you can navigate through it and find peace and comfort. Until next time, have a great week.